There is a specific kind of quiet you only find in the suburbs of Raleigh, North Carolina, right around late April. It's the sound of pine needles hitting the roof of a shaded porch and the distant melodic whistle of a northern cardinal claiming its territory. My name's Diane. I've lived in this 3-bedroom ranch-style home for 28 years. I raised 2 boys here, buried 3 golden retrievers in the backyard, and survived the kind of North Carolina humidity that makes your clothes feel like a wetsuit the moment you step outside. After my husband passed away 3 years ago, the house started feeling less like a home and more like a museum of a life I used to have. It was too big, too many echoes. So I did what every widow in my position does. I decided to downsize. I found a lovely little townhouse closer to my grandkids in Charlotte, and within a week I had a for sale sign in my yard. The market was hot. Within 48 hours I had 3 offers over asking price. I was ecstatic. I could practically smell the clean new carpet of my future life. But in the world of American real estate, there's a boogeyman that sits in the shadows of every closing table. It's called the title search. My buyer's bank required a new survey. No big deal, right? I hadn't moved the house. I hadn't built a skyscraper. I figured it was just a $600 formality to check off a box. I was wrong. I was standing in my kitchen, pouring a glass of sweet tea, when I saw the surveyor, a man named Stan who looked like he'd been carved out of a piece of old hickory, standing at the edge of my driveway. He was looking at his GPS unit, then at his map, then back at the neighbor's driveway. He shook his head, that slow, rhythmic side-to-side shake that tells you someone's wallet is about to get a lot lighter. I walked outside, the gravel crunching under my keds. "Problem, Stan?" He didn't look up immediately. He spit a stream of tobacco juice into the grass and pointed a weathered finger at the beautiful black asphalt driveway belonging to my neighbor, Brad. "Diane," Stan said, his voice as dry as a drought, "I've been doing surveys in Wake County since before you moved here, and I've seen some sloppy work, but this is a masterpiece of not my problem." He walked me to the property pin, a rusted iron stake buried under a layer of mulch. He stretched a neon pink string from that pin to the one at the back of the lot. The string didn't just touch Brad's driveway, it sliced right through the middle of it. According to the original plat map from 1974, the property line runs 3 feet to the left of your garage. Your neighbor's entire turnaround and about 40 feet of his main driveway are sitting directly on your land. He didn't just encroach, Diane. He's basically using your lot as his private parking lot. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine that had nothing to do with the breeze. My house sale was supposed to close in 14 days. No bank in the United States was going to lend money for a property that had a neighbor's driveway sitting on it like a parasitic twin. I thought my retirement was secured by a white picket fence, I whispered to myself, watching a squirrel skip across Brad's illegal asphalt. But it turned out it was buried under 8 tons of my neighbor's arrogance. I looked over at Brad's house, a modern, oversized McMansion that looked like it had been dropped into the neighborhood by a crane. I knew Brad, or rather, I knew of him. He was the kind of guy who wore mirrored sunglasses to mow his lawn and talked about his grind set to anyone who would listen. He was about to find out that in North Carolina, the grind set doesn't mean a thing when it hits a property deed. To understand why I didn't just walk over and ask Brad to move his driveway, you have to understand the dynamic of our street. Brad moved in about 5 years ago. He bought the old cottage next door, tore it down to the studs, and built a white and black box that stood out like a sore thumb among our brick ranches. Brad is 42, drives an Audi that he revs at 6 a.m., and calls himself a disruptive entrepreneur. The first month he was here, he sent me a formal letter, not a card, but a letter, asking me to trim my oak trees because the falling leaves were interfering with the drainage profile of his luxury hardscaping. I had tried to be the good neighbor. I brought him a pumpkin roll at Thanksgiving. He looked at it like I was handing him a plate of poison and said he was doing a juice cleanse. That told me everything I needed to know. So when Stan, the surveyor, confirmed the encroachment, I didn't go in with guns blazing. I took the survey map, put on my best Grandma Diane smile, and walked over to his house. Brad was out in his garage, which was lit like an operating room. He was polishing the rims of his Audi with a microfiber cloth. "Hey, Brad," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Got a minute? We had a survey done today for the house sale, and we ran into a bit of a technicality." Brad didn't stop polishing. He didn't even look up. "If it's about the oak trees, Diane, I told you." "It's not the trees, Brad. It's the driveway." I slid the survey map onto his workbench. "Turns out about 4 feet of your asphalt is on my property. It's holding up my closing. I was hoping we could work out a quick solution. Maybe you could have a contractor trim back the edge." Finally, he looked up. He pushed his mirrored sunglasses onto his forehead and gave me a look of pure, unadulterated condescension. "Diane," he said, chuckling as if I'd just told him the earth was flat, "that driveway has been there for years. The previous owner of my house put that in back in the 90s. Nobody said a word to you then, right? Well, that means I have adverse possession. In the tech world, we call that legacy infrastructure. It's mine now. If your sale is held up, that's a you problem, not a me problem." My sweet tea was starting to turn into acid in my stomach. "Brad, I've been paying the property taxes on that land for nearly 30 years. Adverse possession in North Carolina requires 20 years of hostile use if you don't have a deed, or 7 if you do. You don't have a deed to my yard, and you've only been here 5 years. "I don't care about your math, Diane," he snapped, the nice guy mask slipping. "I'm not cutting my driveway. It would ruin the symmetry of my landscaping. My realtor says my house is worth $1.2 million. You think I'm going to devalue my asset because you want to move to Charlotte? Get real." Then he did it. He actually turned his back to me and started his power washer. The roar of the engine drowned out anything else I could have said. I stood there for a long minute, watching the water blast against his rims. I felt that familiar North Carolina heat rising in my chest, but it wasn't the weather. It was the realization that Brad thought I was just a tired old lady he could bully into a corner. He figured I was desperate to sell. He figured I would just give him an easement, a legal document that would give him the right to use my land forever, for free. If I did that, the value of my house would drop by at least $20,000, and I'd still be responsible for the taxes on land I couldn't use. "Brad," I whispered under the roar of the power washer, "you talk a lot about disruption. Well, you're about to find out what it feels like when the person you're disrupting is an engineer's daughter with a long memory and a very sharp lawyer." I walked back to my house, sat at my computer, and opened a new tab. I didn't search for moving companies. I searched for Wake County Register of Deeds. Brad wanted a war? Fine, but he was about to find out that in the suburbs, the person with the loudest machine doesn't win. The person with the deepest paper trail does. On Monday morning, I didn't go to the garden center. I went to the Wake County Justice Center in downtown Raleigh. If you've never been there, it's a massive building filled with people having the worst days of their lives. But if you head down to the basement, to the Register of Deeds, It's a different world. It's a world of quiet rooms, the smell of old toner, and thousands of leather-bound books that hold the secrets of every square inch of dirt in the state. I was looking for the chain of title. I spent 3 hours at a computer terminal that looked like it belonged in a 1990s library. I started with my own deed. I pulled the original warranty deed from 1996 when my husband and I bought the place. I read every line of the meets and bounds, those confusing descriptions of north 42 degrees 15 minutes east for 150 feet to an iron pipe. Then I pulled Brad's lot history. Here's the thing about Brad's legacy infrastructure argument. He was lying. I found the tax records from 2012. The previous owner of Brad's house, a lovely man named Mr. Henderson, didn't have an asphalt driveway. He had a gravel path that stayed well within the property lines. I found a permit application from 2019. Brad had filed it himself. He'd applied for a surface upgrade, but in the drawing he submitted to the city, he'd conveniently omitted the fact that he was expanding the footprint of the driveway by 6 feet. He hadn't just inherited an encroachment, he had created it. I felt a surge of adrenaline. Brad had committed what the law calls intentional encroachment, and because he'd lied on his permit application, he'd committed a fraud against the city's zoning board. But I needed the killing blow. I needed to know about the easements. In some neighborhoods, there are implied easements where a neighbor has used a path for so long it becomes legal. But as I dug through the 1974 subdivision records, I found a document that made my heart skip a beat. It was a non-access covenant signed by the original developer. It stated that under no circumstances could Lot B, Brad's lot, use Lot A, my lot, for ingress or egress due to a specific drainage pipe that ran right along that line. I looked at the drainage map. That pipe, a 12-inch concrete culvert, was buried exactly 4 feet underground, right under the spot where Brad had poured his heavy asphalt. According to the North Carolina Public Utility Code, you cannot pave over a primary municipal drainage easement with non-porous material without a reinforcement variance. Brad didn't have one. The weight of his driveway was likely crushing the very pipe that kept our street from flooding during a hurricane. I sat back in my chair, the dim fluorescent lights of the records room humming above me. I felt like a detective who had just found the murder weapon. Brad thought he was playing a game of bigger asset. He didn't realize he was playing a game of structural integrity. I walked over to the copier and made 3 sets of everything. The 1974 covenant, the 2012 tax photo showing the gravel path, the 2019 fraudulent permit, the drainage map. As I walked out into the bright Raleigh sunlight, I saw a notification on my phone. It was from the Nextdoor app. Alert, neighbor on Oakmont Drive is trying to force me to tear up my driveway to spite a house sale. Does anyone have a good litigation lawyer? We need to protect our property rights against these bitter long-timers. Hashtag protect suburban values. Hashtag grind set. The comments were already piling up. Typical Raleigh old-timers, they hate progress. Diane has always been a stick in the mud. Let the man have his driveway. I smiled, a slow, cold smile. Brad was using the court of public opinion to shame me. He wanted the neighborhood to hate me so I'd feel guilty and sign the easement. He wanted to turn me into a social pariah. He didn't realize that in the suburbs, the only thing people hate more than a bitter old-timer is a neighbor whose illegal construction makes their property taxes go up and their basements flood. I drove straight to the office of Sarah Jenkins. Sarah is a property lawyer who has a reputation for being a chainsaw in a skirt. She doesn't do mediation. She does results. I laid the documents on her desk. Sarah read through the non-access covenant and then looked at the fraudulent permit. She leaned back in her leather chair and let out a long, low whistle. "Diane," she said, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "Brad didn't just build on your land. He built a legal bomb, and he just handed you the detonator. What's the plan?" I asked. "What's the plan?" I asked. "Well," Sarah said, tapping the drainage map, "we could just sue him, but that takes 2 years. Or we could use the suburban war master strategy. We let him think he's winning, we let him commit even further, and then we call the one person Brad is actually afraid of." "Who?" "The county engineer," Sarah grinned, "because if that pipe is being crushed, the city doesn't just ask you to move the driveway, they come and take it, and they send you the bill for the jackhammers." "Wait," I said, a thought forming. "Brad mentioned he's having the driveway seal-coated this Friday. He wants it to look perfect for his own appraisal." Sarah's grin widened. "Perfect. Let him pay for the seal coating. Let him make it look brand new. It'll make the sound of the jackhammers that much sweeter on Monday morning." The rest of the week was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Every time I saw Brad, I didn't scowl. I didn't mention the survey. I actually waved. I even stopped by the fence on Thursday morning while he was directing a crew of guys in white jumpsuits. "Doing some maintenance, Brad?" I asked, my voice as sweet as the tea in my hand. "Seal coating, Diane," he said, not hiding the triumph in his voice. "It's a high-gloss polymer finish. Costs $3,000. It's going to make this driveway look like a sheet of black glass. Just trying to keep the aesthetic standards up, you know." "It looks very expensive," I said, nodding. "I'm sure it'll be a permanent addition to the property." "Exactly," he said, turning back to the crew. "Make sure you get the edges perfect. I want it to look seamless." I went back inside and called Sarah. "The trap is set. He's pouring $3,000 of polymer onto land he doesn't own." "Good," Sarah said. "I've already sent the FOIA request to the city engineering office. They're sending an inspector out on Monday at 9 a.m. And, Diane, I also contacted a reporter at Newsweek. They're doing a series on suburban land grabs. They're very interested in the fraudulent permit aspect." The social pressure was about to flip. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged in to Nextdoor. I didn't argue with Brad's post. I simply posted a photo of the 1974 non-access covenant and the drainage map. I wrote, "I love our neighborhood and I love the safety of our homes. That's why I was so concerned to find that the 12-inch concrete municipal drainage pipe under Oakmont Drive, the one that prevents our street from flooding during hurricanes, is currently being crushed by a driveway built without the required reinforcement variances. I've reached out to the city to ensure our watershed is protected. We all want symmetry, but I think we all want dry basements even more." The shift was instantaneous. The people who had been calling me a bitter old-timer suddenly remembered the 3 inches of water they had in their garages during Hurricane Florence. "Wait, is that why my backyard is always soggy?" one neighbor asked. "If that pipe breaks, who pays for the repair? All of us?" another added. By Friday morning, Brad's grind set post was buried under a mountain of concerned comments. People weren't looking at his symmetry anymore. They were looking at his asphalt like it was a ticking time bomb. Brad was frantic. I could see him through the window, pacing his deck, his phone glued to his ear. He'd realized that I hadn't just attacked his driveway, I'd attacked his reputation as a smart investor. But the best part was yet to come. Friday afternoon, the seal coating crew finished. The driveway was beautiful. It shone in the North Carolina sun like a polished onyx. Brad stood there with a glass of scotch, looking at it with a mix of pride and desperation. He thought by making it look finished, he'd made it legal. He didn't realize that in 48 hours, that black onyx was nothing but dusty gray rubble. I watched Brad toast his new driveway on Friday night, but by Monday morning, the toast was over. When the city inspector arrived with a red tag and a heavy-duty backhoe, Brad realized that his $3,000 seal coating was just the down payment on a $50,000 disaster. But the real blow wasn't the asphalt, it was the legal lien Sarah was about to place on his $1.2 million McMansion. The weekend after the seal coating was finished was the quietest weekend I've ever experienced on Oakmont Drive. But for Brad, I'm sure it felt like the countdown in a bomb shelter. He had his shiny onyx black driveway, but he also had a neighborhood that was starting to look at him like he was a corporate polluter. In the suburbs, your reputation is your currency. Brad had spent 5 years trying to be the visionary of the cul-de-sac. He wanted to be the guy everyone looked up to, but my next-door post about the drainage pipe had flipped the script. It wasn't about Diane's garden versus Brad's driveway anymore. It was about the neighborhood's infrastructure versus Brad's arrogance. On Saturday morning, I was sitting on my porch, enjoying the rare lack of humidity and watching the cardinals in the pine trees. I saw 2 neighbors from down the street, the Millers, walk by Brad's house. Usually, they'd wave or stop to chat about his Audi. This time, they walked on the far side of the street, staring at the black asphalt with their arms crossed. Brad was on his deck, trying to look busy with a tablet, but I could see him tracking them with his eyes. He was starting to realize that his disruptive innovation was actually just illegal encroachment. Then the media hit. A young woman named Chloe, a reporter for a lifestyle section that often syndicates to Yahoo Lifestyle and Bored Panda, called me. Sarah had done her job well. "Diane," she said, her voice full of that professional curiosity that usually leads to a viral headline, "I'm looking at the documents your lawyer sent over. Is it true your neighbor intentionally built over a municipal drainage main to increase his property's turnaround radius?" "Well," I said, keeping my tone measured but firm, "I'm not a judge, but the 2019 permit application Brad filed clearly didn't show the 6-foot expansion. And Stan, a surveyor with 40 years of experience, confirmed the line. My house sale is in limbo because of it. I just want to move closer to my grandkids, and Brad wants to keep his symmetry at the expense of our street's safety." The article went live on Sunday night. The headline was a masterpiece. "Suburban Grind Set versus Common Sense. Why a $1.2 million McMansion is blocking a grandmother's retirement." It had everything: the fraudulent permit, the hidden drainage pipe, and the photo of Brad's brand new $3,000 seal coating. The comments section on the site was a bloodbath. "I'm a civil engineer," one user wrote. "Paving over a concrete culvert without a variance is asking for a sinkhole. This guy isn't an entrepreneur, he's a liability." Another commented, "Imagine being so entitled that you'd hold up a widow's house sale over 3 feet of asphalt. Brad needs a reality check and a jackhammer." I saw Brad out on his deck around 9 p.m. on Sunday. The glow of his phone lit up his face. He was scrolling. He was reading. He was finally seeing himself through the eyes of the world, and he didn't look like a visionary. He looked like a bully. But Brad wasn't a quitter. He was a disruptor. He sent me a text at 11 p.m. on Sunday. "Diane, your media stunt is illegal. My lawyers are filing for slander of title tomorrow morning. You've devalued my home by 30% with those false claims about the pipe. I hope you're ready for a long court battle. My house isn't going anywhere, and neither is my driveway." I didn't reply. I just forwarded the text to Sarah. "Slander of title?" Sarah texted back with a laughing emoji. "In North Carolina, truth is an absolute defense. He just admitted in writing that he's aware of the pipe claims. He's digging his own grave, Diane. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is Judgment Day." Monday morning in Raleigh felt different. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the looming threat of a typical afternoon thunderstorm. But at 8:45 a.m., the sound of the birds was replaced by the low, guttural rumble of heavy machinery. I was standing on my front porch with a fresh mug of black coffee. I saw the first vehicle, a white Ford Explorer with the City of Raleigh seal on the door. It was the building inspector. Then came the second vehicle, a massive yellow backhoe on a flatbed trailer, followed by a dump truck. And finally, a black SUV pulled up behind them. A man in a sharp suit and a hard hat stepped out. He was the county engineer. They didn't park at my house. They parked right in front of Brad's Onyx driveway. Brad came flying out of his front door. He was in his gym clothes, a tight, moisture-wicking shirt and expensive running shoes. He looked like he was ready to tackle someone. "What the hell is this?" he screamed at the building inspector. "You're on private property. I don't have an appointment." The county engineer didn't even look up from his clipboard. He pointed at the spot where the neon pink string was still stretched across the asphalt. "Mr. Brad Miller?" the engineer asked, his voice echoing in the quiet cul-de-sac. "We've reviewed your 2019 Permit B442A. We've also reviewed the FOIA request regarding the municipal drainage easement. According to our subterranean sensors, there is a significant pressure variance on the 12-inch concrete culvert beneath this surface." "Sensors?" Brad stammered. "What are you talking about? That pipe is 4 feet down. It's fine." "It's not fine," the engineer said, stepping onto the brand new seal coating. "It's not fine," the engineer said, stepping onto the brand new seal coating. "You paved over a primary drainage easement without a reinforcement variance. By doing so, you've obstructed the city's right to immediate infrastructure access. Under North Carolina General Statute Section 160A-312, the city has the right to abate any nuisance that threatens the public utility system, and this driveway is a direct threat to the drainage of 6 surrounding properties." The building inspector pulled out a roll of neon red tape. He started wrapping it around Brad's Audi, which was parked in the turnaround. Move the vehicle, the inspector ordered. This entire surface is being condemned and removed to facilitate emergency pipe inspection. If you don't move it, the city will tow it at your expense. Brad looked at me. I was leaning against my porch railing, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "Diane!" he roared. "You did this! You brought the city into this!" "I didn't bring them into anything, Brad," I called back, my voice calm. "The pipe was there in 1974. You're the one who tried to disrupt it. I just made sure the city knew their property was being crushed." The backhoe didn't wait. The operator, a guy who looked like he'd been waiting all day for this, lowered the heavy steel teeth of the bucket onto the edge of Brad's $3,000 seal-coated asphalt. Crack! The sound of the high-gloss polymer splitting sounded like a gunshot. A massive chunk of black asphalt was ripped out of the ground, revealing the gray, dusty gravel beneath. Brad actually dropped to his knees. "Stop! That's $30,000 of work. I'll move it myself. I'll hire a contractor." "You had 30 days to do it voluntarily, Mr. Miller," the county engineer said, checking his watch. "The grandmother next door asked you nicely. You told her it was a you problem. Well, now it's an everyone problem, and the city is handling the solution." For the next 4 hours, the cul-de-sac sounded like a war zone. Rat-tat-tat-tat, the sound of the jackhammers. Crunch, the sound of the backhoe clawing into the earth. They didn't just remove the 3-foot encroachment. Because the culvert ran deeper under his turnaround, the city removed nearly 40% of Brad's entire driveway. They dug a trench 6 feet wide and 8 feet deep right through his luxury hardscaping. The neighbors were all out on their lawns. Some were taking photos. Some were clapping. Bill, the neighbor who had defended Brad on next door, was nowhere to be seen. He was probably checking his own basement for leaks. By 2 p.m., the job was done. Brad's driveway was no longer a sheet of black onyx. It was a jagged, dirt-filled scar that stopped abruptly 3 feet from my garage. The county engineer walked up to Brad, who was sitting on his front steps with his head in his hands. "The culvert is cracked, Mr. Miller," the engineer said, handing him a yellow slip of paper. "The weight of the unreinforced asphalt caused a structural failure. We're going to have to replace the 12-foot section. Here is your initial invoice for the emergency abatement and demolition. It's $12,000. You'll be receiving a second invoice for the pipe replacement and soil restoration within 30 days. Brad didn't even look up. He just stared at the yellow slip like it was a death warrant. The aftermath of the driveway war was swift and brutal. The next morning, Sarah filed a judicial lien against Brad's property for slander of title and encroachment fines. Between the city's $12,000 bill, the upcoming $20,000 pipe repair, and my $15,000 legal claim, Brad was suddenly looking at nearly $50,000 in immediate liabilities. And because he had a cloud on title from my lawsuit, Brad couldn't refinance his home to pay for it. He was trapped in his $1.2 million box. But for me, the world opened up. With the illegal driveway removed and the property line restored, Stan the surveyor was able to sign off on a clean survey. I handed that document to my buyer's bank at 4 p.m. on Tuesday. We closed on Friday. I sat at that long mahogany table in the lawyer's office, signing the final papers for my house. I felt 20 pounds lighter. I wasn't leaving with a grudge. I was leaving with a check and my dignity. As I was packing my car to head to Charlotte on Sunday, I saw Brad one last time. He was out in his yard with a shovel, trying to level the dirt where his onyx driveway used to be. He looked smaller. His grind-set polo was stained with sweat and clay. I pulled my car to the edge of my driveway, my actual driveway, and rolled down the window. "Moving day, Diane?" Brad asked, his voice devoid of any smugness. "It is, Brad. I'm heading to Charlotte. My grandkids are waiting." He looked at the jagged edge of his ruined yard. "You know, I thought I could just build my way into a higher bracket. I thought the rules were just for people who didn't have a vision." I looked at him, and for a second I felt a flicker of pity. But then I remembered the pumpkin roll he'd rejected and the way he'd laughed in my face when I asked for my retirement security. "Vision is fine, Brad," I said, "but vision without boundaries is just trespassing. You spent $30,000 to prove you were the king of the hill. I spent $600 to prove I was the owner of the dirt. In the suburbs, the dirt always wins." I rolled up the window and drove away. Today, I'm sitting on the back deck of my new townhouse in Charlotte. There are no Audi engines revving at 6 a.m. There is no black asphalt, just a small, tidy garden and the sound of my grandkids playing in the sprinkler 3 houses down. I learned a lot during those weeks on Oakmont Drive. I learned that being a good neighbor isn't about letting people walk all over you or park all over you. It's about knowing where your line is drawn and being willing to defend it with the truth. I learned that the louder a person talks about their grind set and their disruption, the more likely they are to be hiding a crack in their foundation. But most of all, I learned that sometimes the best housewarming gift you can give yourself is a certified survey and a very sharp lawyer. So I'm asking you, if your neighbor built his dream on your foundation and told you to be flexible, would you have signed the easement or would you have waited for the sound of the jackhammers? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. And remember, the deed doesn't lie. People do. Because out here in North Carolina, the view is finally clear, and I'm standing on my own ground.